Good evening, everyone. We're doing organizational theory and behavior. We're at the learning objectives. Number one, we're going to summarize key contributions from the evolution of management. I mentioned that management evolved over time. The need for management evolved as a result of the Industrial Revolution and the need to keep up with changing times. Discuss why it is important to understand organizational behavior. Explain how systems theory relates to organizational effectiveness. Analyze the environmental forces affecting today's management practices, and understand how to frame the study of organizational behavior. So as an introduction, we start off a kind of a question. Imagine working where workers are excited about their jobs. And we went around the classroom asking everyone if they're excited about their jobs. When you're excited about your jobs, you're living in a theory Y world. Anybody remember what theory X and theory Y is from Principles of Management? Anybody kind of remember? Go ahead.
No, I remember that you mentioned.
Okay, so Douglas McGregor, in the 1950s, I believe it was, came up with this concept of theory X and theory Y. It was either the 50s or the 60s. If I'm 10 years off, forgive me. And basically, there are two assumptions. Theory X says that the average employee is lazy, and as such, needs to be supervised very, very closely, micromanaged, because they're not smart, they're not motivated, they need to be given strict work rules and guidelines. If they don't follow, they're out. Okay? Now, Theory Y says no, management is responsible for creating a work environment that is fun, that is interesting, and as such, that will create a context of work where people will be creative and most useful. So, having managed for over 25 years, I could tell you that you want to be a Theory Y manager. Theory X manager is very hard. It's very hard on the manager, even if the manager has to be Theory X because their employees are really lazy and need to be supervised really closely. It takes a lot out of you. Managers listen carefully to a worker's comments. Very, very important. Think of a manager as the maitre d' in a restaurant and the employees as the patrons. Your customers are your employees. Obviously, it's a bit different because they have to listen to you. If I am a maitre d', I don't, my customers don't have to listen to me as if they're my employees, but there has to be that interchange where I care about my employees and they know that I care. If you care about your employees, that changes the entire work dynamic. The atmosphere is vibrant. One of the things that I saw online was a conversation between Simon Sinek and his host also ran a business, and Sinek asked him, how do you judge whether or not your organization is successful? And he said, by the amount of laughter you hear in the hallways. Laughter, fun, playfulness. I'm not talking about buffoonery. I'm not talking about crazy behavior. I'm not talking about antics. I'm not talking about sophomoric tricks. Put a whoopee cushion under somebody's chair, pour water on their head when they're not looking. We're not talking about crazy 10th grade behavior. But if there's laughter and there's that vibe, good vibe at work, people will take to it very, very well. And you have to ask yourself, is this ideal work setting? It must be achieved if a firm, entrepreneur, or institution is to survive the coming years. People have very, very little loyalty today. They have no problem jumping ship, and it's very hard to fill empty spaces. Even if it's a low-level job, okay? It's hard because you have to train people. Even if the training is only a week or 3 days, that's a week or 3 days of your time spent. And if you have a revolving door where you constantly have to rehire people more and more and more, becomes a very, very big challenge. Any questions or comments before we move on?
I'm noticing that even entry-level jobs, they want you to have experience. Like, they don't want to...
Yes, most people don't want to coach and don't want to teach. So environmental forces reshaping management. Technology, absolutely. The need for knowledge of computers. Even the most basic jobs today require computer literacy. If you're afraid of sending emails and all that, you won't survive in almost any job today. Speed of change, learning, not being resistant to change. Psychological contract. Human resources, we'll talk about this. Globalism. The world is no longer this little world in by itself. And of course, there's cultural diversity as well. So a little bit about the origins of management. Okay, before 1900, management was based on trial and error, the rule of thumb. You figured it out as you went along. Kind of crazy. It's like playing chicken with a bus. Very, very dangerous way of doing business. Had little or no theory, did not share ideas and practices, a new industrial era began around the time of the U.S. Civil War. First management publications emerged. Now, the need for management really started earlier when the Industrial Revolution started back in the late 1700s in England, but as far as the need for modern management, that didn't start till around the Civil War. Okay? Frederick Taylor's scientific management, there's one best way of doing things. Some regard Taylor as the father of modern management, very, very much into time and motion studies. He'd sit there with a stopwatch, check on you. Oh, it took you 10 seconds. It should have taken you 9. It's because there's an extra step. Let's remove that step and fix things. Henry Fayol's Function of Management presented what is considered the first comprehensive statement of general theory of management. He had 14 points that spoke to that. You can see that. Go back to your Principles of Management textbooks. You'll see all that. Study of organizational behavior, OB, can help us understand why employees behave as they do. Kind of like what consumer behavior is in marketing, organizational behavior will explain why people behave the way they do at work. Now, I just want to give you a little bit of a backdrop, peel the onion back a bit. It wasn't until the 1930s where there was a study in the Hawthorne Electric Company, the Hawthorne plant where they produced telephone equipment, that they figured out, this guy named Elton Mayo figured out that the interaction between management and employees is very important. In fact, I was having this discussion with somebody at work where they were discussing about bringing somebody back that had left, that we had problems with, and saying that that's going to kill morale. Killing morale is a big deal because half of the work is based on what kind of person is doing the work. If you have somebody incompetent, they're useless. But if you have somebody competent at the work but behaves badly, that is as useless as that, if not worse. And so we also have to look at why one individual group is more productive than another, and why managers continually seek ways to design jobs and delegate authority, which are very, very important. You have to design jobs smartly, make sure that people have the right amount of work, not too much, not too little, where they become bored, and you have to be able to delegate, because if you don't delegate, you never go home. You have no work-life balance, and people feel like you're always on top of them. Organizational behavior is a way of thinking. It's multidisciplinary. Humanistic orientation, we're looking at the human being. Performance-oriented, obviously we're trying to up the performance based on recognized disciplines. Has an application orientation. You can apply it. So the stuff that we're going to learn here is useful. So Exhibit 1.1 is contributions to the study of organizational behavior. It's going to go up to the board over here. I'm sorry. I'm not as young as I used to be, so I'm going to kind of do this block style. All right. There's psychology, concepts, values, self-concept, attribution, learning, motivation, all from the psychological realm. Sociology, group dynamics, work teams, formal organization theory, social psychology, behavioral change, attitude change. Anthropology, remember I spoke about the circle of safety? Anthropology, comparative values, comparative attitudes, and political science, conflict, impressions, coalitions, alliances. All of these things from politics actually play a part in organizational behavior as well. What's going on in Washington today is really what goes on in the modern day workplace in some places. Obviously, it's toxic. I'm not going to get into the political aspect of it, but the stuff that's happening in Washington today can happen in any given boardroom. Leaders in organizational behavior, internal, external challenges, changing makeup and diversity of workforce. People are living different kinds of lifestyles that you may not agree with, but have to live with because people are that way, and society has become that way. So you have to know how to navigate that, dealing with people of different cultures, different races, different attitudes. We are no longer in the cookie cutter, this is it, everybody looks the same, acts the same. Demanding customers, because there's so much competition out there, customers have very, very high levels of expectations and high demands. Changes in markets and competition, using and managing information technology. Everything is in motion and churning and moving hyper fast. Hawthorne studies, I kind of mentioned this. Trade unions rebelled against Taylor's scientific management principle. Mary Parker Foley promoted participatory decision-making and decentralization. Decentralization means that enough of this one guy on the top making all the decisions. Let the people that know the work make the decisions. Let them have a say, which was eons ahead of where management was. Because early management looked at the employee as part of the machine. There's the machine, and then there's the person operating the machine. Machine breaks, the person breaks, it's all one thing. Mary Parker Flay began the beginnings of the Hawthorne studies that I mentioned. Industry wanted evidence that focusing on people produces higher productivity. Harvard University conducted studies, so did Columbia with Elton Mayo. The Hawthorne studies continued. Studies examined the effect of illumination on worker output, rest pauses, shorter days, incentives, and managing in a more humanistic way. Workers produced more merely by being observed and studied. People felt important. Oh, wow. This thing went on for almost, I don't know, eight years, something like 8 years. People with lab coats all of a sudden came in, and you were somebody that was important, as opposed to being this lowly worker that came in with their little brown bag with lunch, or their little metal thermos and their little, I don't know, little school lunch thing, punched in, and the whistle. No, now you're something important. Oh, I'm important? Well, guess what? Why is dress at work such an important thing? Why do in some environments tell you have to wear a suit? Because if you wear a suit, you'll take the job more seriously. That's the mindset. Employees, if they're valued, if they're looked at, if they're dealt with, if they're recognized, they're going to behave differently. Social pressures and group norms could increase or restrict output. It can go both ways. If the boss gets everybody angry, everybody will rebel. And if you try to do the work, they'll look at you, no. You're either with us or against us. And that's where, certain industries, I'm not going to go into which ones, I don't want to cause a revolution here, but in certain parts of government, if you work too hard, people say, you're making us look bad. You better take it easy. Slow the pace, because if you make the pace go faster, it'll become the next expectation. And that's the problem. People are reluctant at times to show the boss what they know how to do or how much they can do, because that'll become the new expectation. And the reward for better work will be more work. And that's what people hated.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
More work without more pay is basically indentured servitude, or even somewhat of a form of corporate slavery, and it's really, really bad.
People who are in those environments,
yeah,
they just try to do as minimum as possible.
Why? Because they realize that if they work too hard, it's not going to be appreciated anyway. Some contend fear of job loss was a factor. Yes, because there were, labor unions were in their embryonic stages, very easy to lose jobs. It's very easy to lose a job now. In the state of New York, it's employment at will. Employment at will means if I don't want you here, you're gone. I don't have to give you an explanation. Goodbye. No explanation needed. So it's pretty scary. Exhibit 1.2, the basic elements of a system. You have inputs, process, and outputs. This is basic stuff from principles of management. And then the stuff in the outputs goes into the environment. So your inputs are your raw materials, the process, meaning taking the conversion process, and the outputs going out into the environment. Systems theory, used to integrate organizational effectiveness and time. Effectiveness criteria must reflect the entire input, process, output cycle. So it's a system. Everything's a system. You buy your raw materials, you process them, and you have output. Interrelationships between the organization and its outside environment, because, for example, if there's a shortage of material, it's going to cause a hiccup in the production. Remember back, I think it was 2010, there was a big tsunami that rocked Japan. If you wanted to rent or lease, you wanted to lease a Japanese car at that time, all of a sudden you went from paying, $250 a month to $550 a month. Why? Because Japan was destroyed pretty much, and all the spare parts were in Japan. So anything, it was pretty bad news.
So did people actually lease the cars that would be worth it?
You had to be all of a sudden, cars that were like a Honda Odyssey were as expensive as some crazy high level model that was that price before the tsunami. But the point is that there was a system, and that system was broken because the Japanese made a mistake of putting all their eggs in one basket, as opposed to having more facilities and knowing that your island is susceptible to earthquake and tsunami. One would think that it's probably not a very good idea to have that, and probably not a good idea to put nuclear reactors near human beings if you do have a lot of earthquakes. We're not going to talk about that though. And the stages of the organization's life, whether it's in its embryonic stage, growth stage, or decline. Ways to improve effectiveness. Provide opportunities for training, development, and continuous learning. You want to be in an organization where learning is important and we're always improving your skills. that shows a commitment to the employee, and hopefully the employee will take notice of that, and that'll be a signal to the employee to give back and to be happy. Share information often with employees. This is a problem. For example, in the corporate culture of Apple's a very hush-hush place. You will know you're part of the process, but you will not be able to talk to her about it. Even though your coworkers, no, we're so afraid of this proprietary knowledge being leaked out that it's kind of like you're working in like old school communist Russia where, KGB, like, shh, don't say anything, loose lips sink ships. But it's hard. It's a harsh environment. Encourage cooperation across teams, departments, and the organization. Link compensation to performance. This is very important. The harder you work, you get paid better. This is actually a part of Frederick Taylor's framework to give people more money and make them prosper along with the organization. But of course, early managers didn't care about that. Avoid layoffs. Simon Sinek talks about this in his book, Leaders Eat Last. He brings an example of a company that instead of having layoffs, they had furloughs. People went on forced vacations for a month and didn't get paid so that others could get paid. And this way, no one got laid off. People made less money as opposed to making no money. Role model positive behaviors and attitudes. Believe it or not, as a manager, people look up to you. And because they look up to you, if you disappoint, they're going to say, well, if the boss comes in late, then why shouldn't I come in late? Respect differences.
I did that with a professor.
Go ahead. Tell me
Yeah,
about
I
it.
did the same thing with a professor. Professor constantly came late to class, so I'm like, I'm not going to bother to show up half the time.
It's a terrible feeling. Yeah. But it really filters down. I mean, imagine if you're in a doctor's office. I work in a doctor's office. Imagine if one of my secretaries saw me screaming at a patient or treating a patient badly. What do you think would be going through their mind? Oh, well, the boss doesn't care, then why should I care? The boss comes in late, why shouldn't I come in late? The boss leaves early every single day, why shouldn't I leave? The boss goes on lunch for 3 hours, why shouldn't I? It's very important when you're at the top to make sure that you model good behaviors. Respect differences across employees. Listen to employees and other stakeholders' concerns and ideas. Very, very important. True story. Many, many years ago, I think it was 1994, when the baseball season was canceled. Topps baseball card company was in a crisis, because if you make baseball cards and the baseball season's canceled, you're not doing anything for that year. So there was a danger of layoffs or shutting down the company. What did they do? They put everybody in a big boardroom and they asked for ideas. That was a smart thing to do. Believe it or not, I think it was a janitor that mentioned that, I have a way of saving money. Stop putting out tons of snacks in corporate offices. Skittles, M&Ms, potato chips. They did a calculation. His suggestion saved the company in 1994 $50,000.
Oh, it's a lot of money.
And a lot of fat. A lot of fat, not there, and a lot of...
janitor came up with this idea.
Janitors are people that could be very smart,
very
practical.
Everyone who has experience.
You know why? Because he was the one filling up the candy dish. He goes, why are you guys doing this? You don't need this. All right, quality and organizational imperative. Deming and Durang, early quality profits. Quality is defined as meeting customers' expectations. Deming, Durang, they came up with this concept called TQM, Total Quality Management, where the customer sets the tone. The customer says, this is quality. And many firms make quality their top priority. And it's not just that, it's an infatuation. It is an obsession, if you will, with quality. And if you go based on what the customer says is quality, you have nothing but success in front of you, because you're not making that decision. You're going based on what customers want. So what happens? Let's take our principles of marketing. If you produce what people want, what do you think people will do? They'll come running to you. And we had the discussion about how Turo is going more online. And why? Why are we doing that? Because that's what people want. People want distance learning. They want to have flexibility. Want flexibility? Oh, we'll do that. That's why online colleges became very, very popular. Why do you think Arizona State University is so popular? So popular that that's the official college of Starbucks. Starbucks pays for its employees' college if you go to Arizona State University.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Okay. Now you want to work for Starbucks? You could. I'm sure you'll be a good barista. I have faith in you. Moving on. Time-based criteria: quality, productivity, efficiency, satisfaction, adaptiveness, not being a dinosaur, and development. Environmental forces reshaping management practice, organizations. exist in societies and are created by societies. Environmental forces in these societies. Now, remember we mentioned anthropology? That's where this comes from. Just think of your religious groups, right, or your culture. You have organizations, you have synagogues, you have the religious institutions, you have churches, you have mosques, you have all these religious institutions are all byproducts of the societies where they are born. Environmental forces in these societies, customer-client needs, legal, political constraints, economic, technological changes. Then we have globalism, the interdependency of transportation, distribution, communication, and economic networks across international borders. We don't live in an isolated world. This especially became very important after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the Iron Curtain in Russia. All of a sudden, that whole part of the world became open. China became open. And as such, the economy became even more global than it ever was. Diversity refers to those attributes that make people different from one another. And there's a tremendous benefit to diversity, besides the fact that people want to associate with organizations that are very careful about people's feelings and sensitive, which is a great thing. There's an added benefit. The culture that you come from shapes the way that you think. So you may think differently because you're from culture X. I'm from culture Y. But if there's a problem, if X and Y meet, wait a minute, I have an idea, you have an idea. I didn't know that because you and your culture rolled with that way of doing things. I never knew that. That's a novel approach. So when you have people from diverse backgrounds, they can look at a problem from different angles and solve it in a novel way, as opposed to having everyone the same. I remember one time I went to a job interview. I'm not going to say which company, but everybody looked the same. It was like one of those paintings, of like the Revolutionary War. Every soldier looks the same. The general looks the same. They're just wearing different outfits. And I remember the person interviewing me looking at my yarmulke, my skull cap, and it was the most uncomfortable feeling. I felt like as if I had a horn coming out of my head or something weird, or I had three heads on my shoulders, and he was looking at me like I'm some strange person, and it made me feel very uncomfortable. And the truth is, I didn't care how much they would offer me. I would not want to work in a place like that because they obviously were not into diversity. Exhibit 1.3 talked about the 6 forces reshaping management practice, which you mentioned. Some of them: technology, power of human resources, globalism, diversity, speed of change, and new psychological contract between employees and their bosses, and of course society at large. The speed of change. Rapid change is found in many areas of business, including technology, demographics, male, female, rich, poor, etc., globalism, and new products and services. Psychological contract. An unwritten agreement between an employee and an organization that specifies what each expects to give, to receive from one another. And the addition to the psychological contract is social responsibility, which is the part 2 of that, towards society. Technology, actions, physical and mental, that an individual performs upon some object, person, or problem to change it in some way. So technology is growing exponentially, and it changes everything. Just think about it. I hate to sound like the old grandfather here, but in my days, we had our computers were so powerful in our minds, like, oh, it'll never get better than this. All of a sudden now my cell phone that I have right now is probably 1,000 times more powerful than the Pentagon supercomputer back in the 1980s, maybe even the 1990s, because things change so rapidly. Exhibit 1.4, framework for studying organizational behavior. You can look at that. There's an entire part to that. We will go through that throughout the course. Understanding and managing individual behavior. Individual performance is the foundation of organizational performance. Understanding individual behavior is critical for effective management. Individual differences, individual motivation, rewards, misbehavior and sanctions, and of course stress that result. And misbehavior turns into legal aspects. For those of you who will take my HR course, we'll talk a lot about things that will get you into a lot of trouble, such as sexual harassment, racism, things of that nature, which is something that is at the forefront. It's on every single newspaper's front page now, where people misbehave, all these allegations. You hear, on the radio, this law firm is going to deal with anybody who was abused, 30 or 40 years ago. There's a lawyer there from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. Imagine that. There was a law firm that I heard on the radio for people that were sexually abused by clergy that is open 8 a.m., 12 a.m., 7 days a week, from 8 a.m. to 12 a.m. to help people. Unbelievable. Group behavior and interpersonal influences. And please, although we're recording, please feel free. Don't feel like you have to be quiet because we're recording. Ask questions. It's fine. This recording is for you.
I totally forgot that was going on.
I know,
I
that's
didn't know
which is good. It's organic. I like it organic. It's fine. Don't worry about it. Nobody sees. Nobody knows. It's facing me, so don't worry about it. Group behavior and interpersonal influence. Interpersonal influence and group behavior are powerful forces that affect organizational performance. Group behavior and interpersonal influence. Leadership. Leadership is so important. It's one of the four functions of management, right? Leadership is the most important because if you're not a leader, then what are you? Then what's the purpose of you being there? You can always have somebody plan for you. You can always have somebody organize. You can always find somebody to control. You can get a good accountant, he'll control your books for you. Group behavior, intergroup behavior, and conflict. Organizational power and politics. A lot of problems at work with politics. Oh, I could write books and books and books on it. How people destroyed each other, destroyed their careers as a result of it. I myself learned a lot. Many times in this particular job, I prevented myself from making mistakes because I made them in the past. For example, if let's say my superior asked me to do something I'm not so happy about his asking me to do, not because it's illegal. I feel it's beneath my dignity to do that. I've learned that in the past when I had that kind of stance, it didn't work out well for me. So instead, I attacked it with humor. And I said to him, you'll owe me lunch. You owe me one, as a joke. And he'll laugh it off because he knows he's asking me to do something a little bit, somebody else could do it, but I'm asking you to do it. But one hand washes the other. In my younger days, I'd be like, what do you mean? How dare you ask me to do that? No. Ask the admin to do that. Don't ask me to do that. And I realized, what? As I got older, I got a little bit smarter and realized, what? Swallow your pride every so often. It's not bad. It's good for you. Organizational process. When behavioral processes in an organization don't function well, problems can arise. Communication process, or the lack thereof. I can tell you, communication is a major problem in multiple organizations. Decision making, or the inability to make decisions, the inability to make decisions rapidly. Leadership process. How is leadership done? Is leadership done by people that are effective leaders, or people put into positions because they know someone? Organizational structure. Managers must understand the formal pattern of activities and interrelationships among the various subunits of the organization. So every little part of the organization is important and interacts. If there's one part of your car, or there's one part of the body that doesn't function well, what happens to the entire body or to the entire vehicle? It can collapse. Right? Somebody, God forbid, has a heart that has an arrhythmia, and it happens at the wrong time. What can happen? Guy could pass out while they're driving, right? As a result of the arrhythmia, they'll lose consciousness and then fall down a flight of steps. Kind of scary. What do you mean? What's the big deal? The heart that little valve didn't, or that little muscle didn't, the electrical current didn't flow properly and cause it to pulsate enough. Well, it can cause the entire system to fall apart. Organizational change and innovation. Effectiveness might be improved by changing the total organization. Sometimes it involves doing drastic things like getting rid of certain parts of leadership. Sometimes you have to, I hate to say this, but you have to clean house. Sometimes you need to get rid of the toxic elements at work and do something that Stalin was good at, purging. I'm not saying doing it like Stalin did it. All of a sudden, where is he? He's not in a good place. But sometimes it involves, making a spectacle out of it and letting everybody know that so-and-so was fired because they did not behave in the right way. They were not team players. We'll send the message to people like, whoa, I've got to behave. I've got to really toe the line here. Be prepared to deal with employees' reactions when change occurs, especially when it comes to firing a favorite manager. Reactions can range from mild to extreme, to even a semi-riot even. In review, did we summarize key contributions from the evolution of management? Absolutely. We spoke about the Hawthorne effects, discussed why it is important to understand organizational behavior. We explained how systems theory relates to organizational effectiveness. Organization can't be effective if you don't have a system that runs on the input conversion output framework. analyze the environmental forces affecting today's management practices, globalism, for example, and help you understand how to frame the study of organizational behavior as a student of management. Thank you very much, and good night.